I was living a quiet life in Seattle, believing my family was safe, believing my daughter was loved and protected, believing my home was still a place where truth mattered. I was a mother and a wife who trusted too easily and asked too few questions. My days were simple, filled with routine, small habits and silent prayers for my daughter's happiness. My son-in-law smiled, often spoke politely, and acted like the perfect family man, but something inside me always felt heavy when he entered the room, a feeling I could not explain and never shared. One afternoon while cleaning the study, I found an envelope hidden between old insurance papers. It was not meant for me. My hand shook as I opened it, and read words I could barely understand at first: medical terms, test results, and warnings. My heart started racing as the truth slowly became clear. My son-in-law was sick, very sick, and the report hinted at behavior that explained everything: the cheating, the lies, the distance from my daughter, the secret life he was living behind closed doors. I felt fear, not for myself, but for my child, my daughter, who trusted him completely, who shared a home, a bed, and a future with a man who was hiding something dangerous. I knew I had to speak, I knew I had to protect her, but before I could say a word, my world began to change in ways I never imagined. That evening my husband looked at me differently, his eyes cold, his voice firm. He told me I was not allowed to touch anything in the house. He said I was a risk. He said I could bring illness and shame into our family. He used fear as a weapon and silence as a cage. I was confused, hurt, and terrified as the walls of my own home began to close around me. I did not know yet that this was only the beginning. The next morning I woke up feeling like a stranger in my own house. My husband had placed rules everywhere without writing them down. I could feel them in the air. I was told to use separate dishes, to stay in one room, to wash my hands again and again. He watched me closely, like I was something broken, something dangerous. I wanted to scream that I was healthy, that I was his wife, that I had done nothing wrong, but fear had already taken over his mind. He spoke softly, but his words were sharp. He said the family could not take risks. He said people would talk. He said I did not understand how serious this was. Every time I tried to mention the medical report, his face hardened. He warned me never to bring it up again, never to mention my son-in-law, never to contact my daughter about it. He said I would destroy everything if I spoke. Days passed slowly. Each hour felt heavier than the last. I ate alone. I sat alone. I watched the house continue without me, like I had already disappeared. My husband stopped asking how I felt. He only asked if I followed the rules. Sometimes I caught him wiping surfaces after I touched them, and the humiliation burned deeper than anger. At night, I lay awake, replaying everything in my mind: the report, the dates, the warnings, the proof that something was very wrong. I wondered how long they had known. I wondered if my husband had already chosen silence over truth. I wondered if my daughter's safety mattered less than keeping secrets. I realized then that this was not about sickness, it was about control. It was about fear being used to erase me. I was not quarantined to protect others, I was quarantined to stay quiet. And deep inside, I knew I could not stay quiet forever. One afternoon while sitting alone, I began to notice small things that did not make sense. My husband started moving papers, locking drawers, and taking phone calls in another room. Whenever I came near, his voice would drop, and his back would turn to me, like I was no longer part of his world. The house felt divided, and I was on the wrong side of it. I remembered how he used to talk about honesty, how he once promised me we would always protect our children no matter the cost. Now he avoided my eyes and spoke only in commands. I felt like a guest who had overstayed her welcome in a life she helped build. The more I watched, the more I understood that the medical report was not the only secret. Money was disappearing, accounts were being rearranged, documents were missing. My son-in-law was not just hiding his illness, he was hiding choices that affected all of us, and my husband was helping him do it. I felt a deep pain knowing betrayal can come quietly, wearing the face of love. I had trusted my husband with everything: my fears, my future, my family, and now he was standing between me and my daughter like a wall built from lies. I began to keep my own secrets. I listened without reacting. I remembered dates, names, and words. I stayed silent, not because I was weak, but because I was learning silence can also be a form of strength. I told myself I would wait for the right moment, because truth needs patience to survive. And I waited. The days blended together. I moved through the house like a shadow. My husband spoke less. My son-in-law acted normal. When he passed me, I forced a smile. My heart ached for my daughter, who had no idea of the storm brewing around her. I watched her laugh and share moments with a man who was hiding everything, and I felt powerless yet determined. I started keeping a journal, writing down every conversation, every small clue, every strange behavior. I pretended to follow the rules, but in secret I was collecting pieces of the truth. I had to know the full story before I could act. I could not let fear win. I could not let silence destroy my family. Sometimes I would hear them whispering in another room, my husband and my son-in-law making plans I could not understand. I imagined the lies they were telling my daughter, the half-truths, and the manipulated stories that would protect their secrets. I felt my chest tighten with anger and fear, but I refused to lose control. I had to be smart, I had to be careful. I also began to notice small cracks in their armor, small gestures that betrayed guilt and panic. I saw my son-in-law flinch. When I entered the room, I saw my husband hesitate. When he thought I was unaware, I realized that even though they were trying to trap me, fear does not always belong to the victim. And slowly, I began to see a way forward. One evening I heard my daughter crying softly in her room and my heart nearly broke. I wanted to rush to her to hold her like I used to, but the rules still surrounded me like invisible chains. I stood outside her door listening to her pain, knowing she was suffering without understanding why, and in that moment I made a promise to myself that I would not fail her. The next day my husband left his phone on the table. By mistake it buzzed again and again with messages I was not supposed to see. My hands trembled, but I looked. The words confirmed everything: appointments, payments, warnings, and reminders, all connected to my son-in-law, and all carefully hidden from my daughter. My husband was not just protecting a secret, he was helping to build a lie. I felt sick, not from fear but from betrayal. This was the man I shared my life with, the man who now treated me like a threat while standing beside someone who had truly endangered our family. I realized the danger was never me. That night I did not cry, I did not confront anyone. I sat quietly and organized my thoughts. I knew now that truth alone was not enough. I needed proof, and I needed to reach my daughter without them stopping me. I understood then that silence had taught me how to see clearly, and clarity was power. I began to plan quietly, watching every move, noting every conversation, keeping every detail in my mind like a map I could follow later. My husband thought I was broken and obedient, but in truth I was learning every pattern, every habit, every lie they tried to hide. I watched my son-in-law closely, the way he avoided certain rooms, the way he answered questions too quickly, the way he kept his distance from my daughter, and I recorded it all in my memory. One afternoon I found another envelope hidden under a stack of bills. It was smaller this time, but the contents were heavier. The words confirmed my worst fears: financial manipulations, threats, and instructions to stay silent. It was a chain of control designed to make me disappear from the truth. I read it slowly, letting every word sink in. I realized I had to be careful, but I also realized that waiting too long could be dangerous. I also noticed small victories. I could not ignore my daughter sometimes asked questions my husband tried to dodge, and I saw the hesitation flicker across his face. It was proof that even lies have cracks, and even fear has moments of weakness. I knew that if I timed it right I could use those cracks to reach her without alerting the others. Each night I sat alone thinking, imagining the moment when I could finally speak. I rehearsed every word, every gesture, and every possible reaction. I told myself that courage is not always loud, sometimes courage is silent and slow and precise. And I began to feel hope. The days grew longer and heavier as I continued to watch and wait. I learned to move without being noticed, to speak without being heard, and to observe without being seen. My husband grew more confident in his control, and my son-in-law more careless, thinking I was still trapped in fear, but I had changed inside. I was no longer afraid, I was planning. One afternoon my daughter came to me asking a question about her husband, something small, but enough to show that she sensed a secret. I smiled softly and answered carefully without giving away my knowledge. I felt the weight of responsibility press against my chest. I could not fail her now, not after all the waiting and watching. I realized that love for her was stronger than fear for myself, and stronger than the walls my husband had built around me. I began to gather evidence, slowly photographing documents, noting conversations, memorizing appointments, and remembering every small detail that could prove the truth. One day I would need it all to reach her and to show her what had been hidden. At night I lay awake thinking about the person I was and the person I had become: the quiet observer, the hidden guardian, the mother who refused to stay silent even when the world tried to erase her voice. I felt a new strength rising inside me, a strength that would not be broken by fear or humiliation. And in the silence I promised myself that I would not stop until my daughter knew the truth. I began to notice small mistakes my husband and my son-in-law made when they thought I was not paying attention: doors left unlocked, papers misplaced, words spoken too quickly, and eyes that flickered with guilt. Each mistake was a gift, each crack in their control a chance for me to reach my daughter. I started making mental notes of everything, storing it carefully like treasure I could use later. One evening my son-in-law argued quietly with my husband in the kitchen. I stayed hidden, listening to every word he admitted: small lies, financial mistakes, and careless decisions. He thought I could not hear him. He spoke freely, not knowing that my mind was recording every sound, every detail. I realized then that truth has a way of showing itself if you are patient enough to see it. I also watched my daughter closely. I noticed the small doubts in her eyes, the questions she whispered to herself, the moments she hesitated when her husband spoke. I knew she sensed the cracks, even if she did not know what was behind them. I wanted to reach her without frightening her. I wanted her to know me as a mother and a guide before the world of lies closed around her completely. Each night I felt the tension in my body ease a little. I knew I was moving closer to a moment I could not yet see, but I could feel it approaching like the edge of a storm. I would not run, I would not hide, I would not be silenced. And finally I began to believe that truth could still win. I realized I needed a plan that could not fail. I could not confront them directly, not yet. I had to find a way to reach my daughter without alerting my husband or my son-in-law. I began leaving small hints in places she would notice, notes in her books, gentle reminders that something was wrong without revealing the full story. I had to guide her slowly toward the truth so she could understand without fear. One afternoon I found a small folder my husband had hidden behind the bookshelf. It contained letters, receipts, and messages that proved everything my son-in-law had done: the cheating, the deception, the financial manipulation, all of it carefully documented. I felt my hands shake as I held the papers. This was the proof I had been waiting for, the key to open the door that had been locked around my daughter's life. I began to memorize every detail, taking mental photographs, storing each word in my mind. I could not risk taking the physical folder. I would be discovered. I learned to trust my memory more than anything else. I whispered to myself that knowledge is power and power is patience. At night, I rehearsed how I would speak to my daughter, how I would show her the truth and protect her from the betrayal I had endured. I promised myself that I would not falter, not even if they tried to stop me, not even if I felt fear clawing at my heart. And I felt a quiet strength I had never known before rising inside me. The moment finally came when my daughter asked me a question that pierced my heart. She wanted to know why her husband sometimes seemed distant, why he avoided certain topics, and why her father had grown so controlling. I looked at her eyes filled with trust and love, and knew I could no longer wait. I had to guide her carefully toward the truth. I told her small truths in gentle pieces. I spoke in ways that did not scare her. I left out the details that could confuse or hurt her. For now, I focused on helping her feel safe and strong. I reminded her that she deserved honesty, and that she had a right to know about the choices being made around her. Slowly her eyes widened with understanding and fear mixed together. She took my hand, and I held it tightly, letting her feel that she was not alone. That night we sat together quietly, and I watched her think. I could see her realizing the depth of the lies and the manipulation around her, but she also saw my strength and my calm. I knew then that the bond between us had become stronger than any secret or deception that had tried to divide us. I felt hope for the first time in weeks, knowing that the truth was no longer mine alone to bear, that my daughter could stand with me and face what had been hidden together. And in that moment, I understood that courage is contagious. The next days were tense but different now. I had an ally in my daughter. She asked questions. I answered carefully, giving her just enough to understand without overwhelming her. We moved quietly through the house, pretending everything was normal, while secretly planning our next steps. My husband and my son-in-law did not notice the change in us. They thought we were still trapped by fear, but we were already moving toward freedom. I began to show my daughter small pieces of evidence in ways she could see without alerting anyone else, documents hidden in plain sight, photographs of messages, and reminders she could read and understand. Slowly, she began to piece the story together, the lies, the secrets, the manipulation. Everything I had feared was now becoming real to her. She looked at me with gratitude and determination, and I felt a bond stronger than any wall my husband had tried to build. Together we talked late at night. We whispered plans and imagined what we could do. We practiced speaking with courage and patience, and I realized that even in the darkest moments, hope can grow if you nurture it carefully. I felt my fear fading, replaced by purpose and resolve. I knew we were ready to act when the time was right. And finally, I felt a quiet certainty that truth and love could overcome control and deception. The day came when I knew we could no longer wait. My daughter and I moved carefully, gathering the proof we had collected for weeks. Every document, every note, every photograph became a tool to show her the truth without putting ourselves in danger. My husband and my son-in-law were unaware that we had already begun to build a plan to confront the lies and protect what mattered most. We spoke quietly together late at night. I guided her through each piece of evidence, explaining gently what had been hidden from her. I could see the shock in her eyes, but also the clarity forming. She understood the betrayal, the manipulation, the deception, and she felt the courage to face it without fear. I felt a deep sense of relief, knowing that the truth could finally be shared safely, and that the bond between us was unbreakable. The next days were delicate. We moved like shadows in the house, pretending everything was normal, while preparing to confront the reality of what had been hidden. We knew patience was necessary, and timing was everything. We were no longer victims. We were ready to act with strategy and love. And in that readiness, I felt a power I had never known, a power born from truth, patience, and unwavering love. The moment finally arrived. I spoke to my daughter calmly, clearly, and with love, showing her every piece of evidence and explaining everything she had been kept from. She listened intently, her eyes wide with shock and understanding. She hugged me tightly and whispered that she trusted me and would stand with me. Together we faced the truth and the fear that had tried to silence us for so long. My husband and my son-in-law could not hide their guilt or control any longer. We remained calm and united, and slowly the walls they had built around their secrets began to crumble. My daughter confronted them with strength and courage. I stood beside her, silently supporting every word she spoke. We did not scream, we did not plead, we only showed the truth and our bond, and that was stronger than any lie or fear they had used against us. In the weeks that followed, life began to change. We set boundaries, we rebuilt trust, and we healed the wounds that had been hidden for too long. I realized that humiliation and fear can be powerful, but love, patience, and courage are stronger. We had turned silence into strength, secrets into proof, and fear into action. My daughter and I had reclaimed our lives and our dignity. And in the quiet moments, I knew that no matter what anyone tried to hide or control, truth would always find a way to shine, and love would always guide the way.